Joseph Kishore, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Primo. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for being back on. I actually interviewed you 4 years ago when you first ran for president with the Socialist Equality Party, and you're
Right.
running again this year. So, wanted to speak a little bit about your campaign. I'm sure that you're running on a lot of the same issues, but I'd love to know what you're focusing on this campaign season, what you think are really the most important issues in the 2024 election.
Well, the central purpose of our election campaign, Jerry White and I, is to develop within the working class an understanding that none of the problems it confronts, that workers all over the world confront, can be resolved outside of the development of a socialist movement, a socialist political movement in the working class, and the building of a socialist leadership in the working class. That's the basic aim of our campaign. In terms of the issues which are really central. One, the escalating global war. Genocide in Gaza is now developing into a war throughout the Middle East, imminent escalation against Iran, the bombing of Lebanon, the extension of the genocide itself now into northern Gaza, that this is part of a global war, including the US-NATO war against Russia in Ukraine, which is also entering a new dangerous period. The danger of, or I would say that really the initial stages of a global war, which has the most catastrophic consequences and implications for the entire world. And the necessity for the development of a movement in the working class against war. At the same time, there is the escalating war on the working class within the United States, the breakdown of democratic forms. This is an election in which fascism is being normalized, or again, becoming very much part of the political landscape. Trump's campaign is, and even in the weeks leading up to the election, really escalating as fascistic agitation. The attack on what he's referred to as the enemy within, which means the working class and all opposition to the policy of the corporate and financial oligarchy. At the same time, the Democratic Party offers no alternative. It's a party of war, of Wall Street, and the military intelligence agencies, and it is focused above all on the escalation of the war. There is at the same time a significant expression of social anger in the working class. You have the repeated no votes at contracts, the ongoing strike of Boeing workers. There's a strike here in Michigan of Eaton aerospace workers, which is very significant. In the working class, there's enormous social anger, opposition, a desire to fight, hostility to the immense levels of social inequality, of the intensifying exploitation. But again, we see the central issue as the development within the working class of an understanding that the basic question it confronts is capitalism, a social and economic system which is responsible for the really intensifying crises, intersecting crises in the United States and throughout the world that we confront.
And just so our viewers know, what states are you currently on, or sure, a few of the states that you're on the ballot on, and I know that there's different statuses. There's like write-in status in certain states. If you just go over some of those.
Yeah, well, you can go to socialism2024.org/vote, which gives a map of all the places where we are on the ballot or have official write-in status. We are officially on the ballot in 3 states. Michigan, Washington State, and New Jersey. And we have official write-in status in many other states. I'm not sure how familiar your viewers may be with the incredibly undemocratic laws that exist to prevent third parties from even getting on the ballot. Here in Michigan, we had to gather 12,000 signatures, in fact, about double that amount just to get on the ballot. In some states, the number of signatures for independent candidates is prohibitive unless you have millions and millions of dollars. So getting on the ballot is itself an extremely difficult hurdle to achieve for independent candidates. But we are, as I said, on the ballot in Michigan after a very intensive political fight, very broad support here for the campaign, and in Washington and New Jersey.
I think the whole write-in status thing is kind of ridiculous because like you have to get a certain kind of status to even let people write your name in. Like it just seems like you should be able to in any state be able to write in a candidate.
Yeah, you would think. You would think. In some cases, actually, it's very difficult even to get on the get in write-in status. In California, you have to get. It was well over 100 electors signed up and notarized, which is itself a challenge just to get write-in status. So yeah, it's remarkable the restrictions that exist. And of course, that's just the question of ballot access and voting, the domination over the entire election of money. This really is an oligarch's election. Behind Trump and his fascist agitation stand a significant section of the corporate ruling class that is breaking with democratic forms of rule, what remains of them. And on the other hand, Harris has a support of very significant section of billionaires as well. And they're essentially, competing over who has the most resources from the corporate and financial elite. So, the media plays its role, excluding any discussion of the opposition candidates. Certainly our campaign, which is basically blacked out in the media. Even here in Michigan, where we are on the ballot, there has been effectively no media coverage of the campaign. And that's, of course, for very deliberate reasons.
Well, what would happen if you won a state where you didn't have write-in status? Like, what if just everybody in one of those states happened to write you in? Would they just throw out all those votes?
I don't know the answer to that. If you don't have official write-in status, they don't count the votes. That's
crazy.
Yeah.
Well, could you tell us a little bit about the Socialist Equality Party? I know we spoke a little bit last time about how there's many different socialist and communist parties throughout the United States and have been, over the last 70 or 80 years. But could you just share sort of details about your party and sort of what the values of your party are?
Sure. The Socialist Equality Party is affiliated with the International Committee of the Fourth International, which is the World Trotskyist movement, where it's an international party or an international organization. Our perspective is global. The Trotskyist movement arose out of Trotsky's leadership of the opposition to Stalinism, the Stalinist bureaucracy, which usurped power in the Soviet Union in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution, beginning in the early mid-1920s. The Fourth International was itself formed in 1938. That is the history of our movement. The International Committee of the Fourth International has upheld and defended the principles of Trotskyism throughout the 20th and the 21st centuries. The perspective of the SEP is for the mobilization of the working class as a independent social and political force, that none of the problems that can be confronted outside of that. And we fight to unify the working class all over the world on the basis of its class interests, to oppose all forms of nationalism, all attempts to divide workers against each other, promotion of identity politics, which is a politics of the upper middle class. The SEP fights to expose the role of those political tendencies that seek to subordinate workers and young people to the capitalist parties, with the promotion of the fiction that the Democrats or the Republicans can be reformed to represent the interests of the vast majority of the population. These are parties of the corporate and financial elite. And so we're fighting to build a movement in the working class, to develop a rank and file rebellion among workers against the trade union apparatus, which works everywhere to constrain, smother, suppress the class struggle. And perhaps we may speak about this in greater detail in relationship to recent developments. But that is our perspective. We are convinced that the working class is an enormously powerful social and revolutionary force in the United States and throughout the world. It is in that social force that the movement against war, defense of democracy, against inequality, that it's in that social force that such a movement must be based, and that's what we are fighting to do. But the perspective of internationalism is deeply rooted in our whole perspective. We're not simply trying to develop a movement in the United States. We see the building of a movement in the working class here as a essential component of a global movement of the working class throughout the world.
So when you speak about that, are there any nations that you think really reflect the values of socialism, of Trotskyism? Are there sort of model examples anywhere in the world, or is the working class kind of in the same situation in every nation throughout the world?
Well, there are various variants in different countries, but no, there is not a socialist uh, country. Um,
Not even like,
Capitalism.
say, Cuba, for example.
Yeah, no, no. All of these involve complex historical issues. The history of the Trotskyist movement is the history of the fight to clarify and orient and develop a perspective, an independent perspective in the working class. And that has involved opposition to many different forms of bourgeois nationalism, petty bourgeois radicalism, Stalinism. In the case of Cuba, for example, it's a very important historical experience. The Cuban Revolution, there was it was actually very critical in the origins of our own movement, the Workers' League, which was formed in 1966, is in part of or in political solidarity with the International Committee of the Fourth International, but the Socialist Workers' Party, which had been the Trotskyist movement in the United States as part of its adaptation to Stalinism and bourgeois nationalism, completely adapted to Castroism, and the whole conception that one could build socialism without a political movement of the working class that takes power, and without the development of an international movement. The Castro government in its origins was based upon the peasantry and sections of the middle class, not the working class. There then developed in Latin America a whole sort of conception of guerrilla warfare promoted by Che and others. It was all very much a substitute for the Marxist conception that the basis of socialism must be, and a socialist movement must be, the working class and the fight for a political leadership in the working class. And when we say the working class, we mean all of those, that class, the vast majority of the population, which produces everything, which is the source of all value, which is exploited by the gigantic corporations and banks, and who's based upon profit. And the working class is the most powerful social force because it is the fundamental base of production on a world scale. So perhaps it's a longer answer to your question, but there does not exist capital. We live in a global capitalist society, and every country workers face basically the same issues. They face the dictatorship of the corporate financial elite. They face the escalating global war driven by the imperialist powers, and they are part of a global production process, and therefore have the same interests.
Well, you did speak about the weaponization of identity politics, and I just would love for you to speak about that a little more because that seems like such a prevalent issue, recently in U.S. history, and especially, in this election, there's just so much focus on transgender issues, and you hear from the right, being anti-woke. I'm just wondering if you could kind of go into more detail what your perspective is on this, this divide that we're facing.
Well, the Socialist Equality Party, we defend and insist upon the democratic rights of all and equality for all, regardless of race and gender and sexual orientation. And these are, these are critical democratic questions, and we oppose the vicious right-wing agitation, which is centered in relationship to Trump and the Republicans. It's actually really centered on the attack on immigrants and refugees. And there is a real sort of effort to whip up racism. All it is backward and filthy. But when we speak about identity politics, we're talking in particular about the political sort of framework of Democratic Party politics, which is the promotion of the idea that the basic divisions in American society or in society as a whole are along the lines of race, of gender, rather than class, and the systematic effort to obscure the class issues. I mean, it is striking. The Democratic Party, and this really fuels and gives Trump the ability to exploit social grievances, has nothing really to offer the working class to address the immense social crisis. You have the phenomenon of Barack Obama the other week excoriating Black men for not voting for Harris, basically charging them with being misogynists, hating women, and that's why they were not voting or planning on not voting for Harris, rather than, the fact that the Democratic Party has nothing to offer any section of the working class, that its central priority is war. And the Democrats, they have this idea, they are building their politics on the basis of different sort of ethnic or racial identities, not on the basis, and it's bound up with the class character of the Democratic Party, not on the basis of addressing the actual social crisis facing workers of all races or genders. So the Democratic Party and organization, what we refer to as the pseudo left, that is the DSA and various political organizations in and around the Democratic Party, they've relentlessly promoted racial division. It was evident and also embodied in the New York Times and its so-called 1619 Project, which was a Democratic Party operation, which sought to basically rewrite American history as the history of racial conflict. And that's sort of very definite political purposes, to divide workers against each other. It's also used to advance the interests of sections of the upper middle class within academia, the state. It has nothing to do with the interests of the working class, of any race, gender, or other identity.
Well, another major issue this election cycle is obviously the genocide that's been taking place in Gaza, and the expansion of that conflict into Lebanon, and it seems as though fairly soon there's going to be all-out war between Israel and Iran. I'm curious, especially because you're in Michigan. I know that this issue in particular, there's a heavy focus in the framework of Michigan because there's a heavy Muslim American population there. So kind of curious, what you're hearing from those folks, how they're kind of perceiving this, and just, again, your general thoughts on this conflict in the Middle East.
Well, I mean, there's enormous anger, and not, obviously, yes, among the predominantly Arab population and of workers, young people in Dearborn and other areas in around Detroit, but certainly not limited to that. I mean, we've seen over the past year mass protests involving millions throughout the world, the demonstrations and other actions on college campuses. And we see, I mean, the incredible, crimes that are being committed and now are being expanded. And it is, it's been now more than 1 year of the genocide and of protests against it. And certain conclusions really do need to be drawn. I mean, it is not only, the genocide has not only not been stopped, it's continuing, it's escalating. And there has to be a certain drawing of a certain balance sheet drawn. I mean, the perspective of many, or the overriding perspective of those who organized the protests against the genocide and really sought to divert opposition was that somehow the genocide would be stopped through appeals to the parties carrying it out or responsible for it, the Democrats, for example. And you still have that, and that's promoted by people like Ocasio-Cortez and the DSA, that somehow this administration, which is dripping in blood from these crimes, can be pressured. And it's a it's a bankrupt perspective, and it's one which is connected to a denial or attempt to obscure what the genocide really expresses or what it comes out of. I mean, this is not just a question of, the criminality of the Netanyahu regime or those who have backed it. It cannot really be understood simply as a product of the misnamed Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I say misnamed because it's not a conflict, it's decades of brutal repression now transformed into mass slaughter on an industrial scale. But it has to be understood as a component part of a global war. It has to be seen as an expression of the of imperialism, which arises out of the capitalist system, and it has to be fought on that basis. One of the so in terms of what people are, I mean, I think there are a lot of workers and young people who are beginning or asking such questions. How is it possible that such a crime not only can be committed, but is openly defended by the imperialist states, proclaimed? It arises out of a society that has reached a historical dead end, and really all of the issues that workers and young people confronted in the 20th century, world war, of genocide itself, these are now coming back again at an even higher level, and it does require a more serious politics. It's not going to be resolved through trying to pressure the existing states or the existing governments. It requires a different perspective. So I think there is a great interest in that, and what really has to be done. We have gotten obviously a lot of support here in Michigan, but it's not just a Michigan question. But I think that these are the types of questions that really have to be addressed, and the type of perspective that has to be fought for.
So one political candidate who I think has benefited in this election, given the fact that Trump and Harris are both effectively pro-genocide, is Jill Stein. And she seems to be getting a lot of support, which is somewhat impressive considering how she was so demonized after 2016, and we just kept endlessly getting this photo of her sitting at the table with Putin and Flynn. And again, she seems to be benefiting. She's polling pretty well in swing states like Michigan. I'd be curious what your thoughts are on Jill Stein and the Green Party, and why voters shouldn't why they should vote for you instead of her.
Yeah, well, she's getting support because there is opposition, particularly to the genocide in Gaza. But the perspective of the Green Party is not one which really does not offer a way forward. I think it's first of all important to refer to the experience of the Green Party in Germany, which came to power in the late 1990s. It had similar origins and perspective as the Green Party in the United States, involved in various sort of pacifist protests and environmentalism, came to power in the late 1990s as part of a coalition government with the Social Democratic Party, and was involved directly in the first military intervention of Germany since the Second World War, the war in Yugoslavia. Now the German foreign minister is a member of the Green Party. And she just issued a vicious statement justifying the targeting by Israel of civilian buildings as part of the genocide in Gaza. The Green Party in Germany is one of the most ferociously pro-war. And I raise this because it's an experience not just of a one party in one country, but it's a political perspective. And the perspective of the Green Party and the Stein is that somehow it's possible to stop the genocide without overthrowing the social and economic system which has produced it. And their perspective is actually ultimately that they're going to pressure the Democrats to change their course. Stein herself issued a statement recently where she said that, it was necessary, in her view, to hold their feet to the fire, referring to the Democrats. But it's not a question of holding their feet to the fire, as if, if they feel the pressure involved or expressed in a vote for the Green Party, that the Democrats will shift to the left or will realize that they can't support genocide and win in the elections. No, because they're not carrying out this policy out of sort of just a mistake or so. It's an expression of the interests of the American financial corporate elite, of imperialism, which the Democratic Party expresses. Parties are the expression of class interests. So the idea of sort of shifting policy, or even shifting policy within the framework of the existing state institutions. She also had a statement in which she said, oh, well, if she was elected, that she would end the wars through negotiation. And she actually referred to negotiating with our enemies, actually accepting the framework of imperialist geopolitics. But war isn't a product of sort of the absence of negotiation. I mean, it's obscuring the actual roots of not just the genocide, but the broader war of which it's a part, and that is in the capitalist system. Our perspective, the perspective of the Socialist Equality Party, is not that this is going to be stopped by changes within the state apparatus and maybe a new policy which is adopted because of pressure. I think the experience of the past year has demonstrated that that's not how the ruling class responds to mass opposition. The ruling class responds to opposition through repression, arrests, as they've done in campuses, the turn towards overt dictatorial forms of rule, as they are promoting with the Trump campaign, and that the necessary means of fighting against the genocide and the policy of the corporate financial oligarchy, which is behind it, is through the mobilization of the working class and mass struggle. That is the way forward, through a fight to develop a mass social movement, which has as its aim the taking of power by the working class. Again, not sort of manipulations at the top, but through the development of a social, political, revolutionary movement of the great majority of the population. So it's a fundamentally different perspective and orientation. The Green Party, and also add the similar with the campaign of Cornel West, which raises particular issues, but basically I think similar perspective, which is advanced.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that kind of caused some controversy recently was when Jill Stein put out this statement. It was following her interview with Mehdi Hassan, where he was pushing her on saying whether or not Putin was a dictator or a war criminal.
We looked at your social media, and you haven't done that many posts specifically calling out Russian attacks on civilian areas. You haven't called Vladimir Putin a war criminal, but you have called Benjamin Netanyahu a war criminal.
No, actually we did.
Yeah.
In my very first remarks about the Ukraine war, we condemned...
Vladimir Putin's a war criminal in your view.
Yes, we did
And Bashar al-Assad's a war criminal.
Yes, in so many words. Yes, we have said as much.
So you called Netanyahu one, which I think he is.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
Is Putin a war criminal?
So what we said about Putin was that his invasion of Ukraine is criminal. It's a criminal and murderous war.
And he's a war criminal who should be on trial.
Well, by implication.
You're struggling here to say something very simple. This is why people have their doubts about you in Russia.
Well,
why is Benjamin Netanyahu a war criminal but not Vladimir Putin?
Well, as John F. Kennedy said, we must not be afraid to, we must not negotiate out of fear, and we must not fear to negotiate. So if you want to be an effective world leader, you don't start by name calling and hurling epithets.
So how will President Stein negotiate with Israel then if you've called Netanyahu a war criminal?
Well, because he very clearly is a war criminal.
So Putin clearly isn't a war criminal.
Well, we don't have a decision, put it this way, by the International Criminal Court.
Yes, we do.
Yes, actually,
actually you're wrong. There's an arrest warrant for Putin. There isn't yet an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. So why is Putin not a war criminal, but Netanyahu is?
Yeah.
I think they both are. You don't.
Let me say this. We are sponsoring that war. We are sponsoring Netanyahu.
That's our war.
He is our dog in this fight. That is why we have a responsibility.
No disagreement
to
from
pull
me at
him
all.
back.
But that
with
does
Russia,
not answer my question.
With Russia, it's
whether
far
we sponsor them or not
complicated.
is irrelevant. Either you're a war criminal or you're not. Is Vladimir Putin a war criminal?
In so many words, yes, he is.
I don't know what so many words are. Butch, is Vladimir Putin a war criminal?
And she put out a statement saying that Putin and Assad were war criminals. This caused some conversation on the left. Previously I had Howie Hawkins on the show, and he took a imperialist light approach on issues like Syria. And then also in regards to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, something that we heard a lot in regards to that was this was Russian imperialism. So I'm kind of curious on what your thoughts are on these issues. Generally, should we consider Putin and Assad dictators? Should we consider the conflict in Ukraine as Russian imperialism? Just what are your sort of general thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I think that statement from Stein was an adaptation to, or sort of articulated the perspective of imperialism. But I think, the Socialist Equality Party, the International Committee of the Fourth International, we are not supporters of the Putin government. I would say it's a capitalist regime. Putin represents a faction of the Russian oligarchy. We opposed the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, but we rejected absolutely the claim that it was unprovoked. And we reject the concept of Russian imperialism, which is basically employed, or for that matter, Chinese imperialism, which is employed by sections of particularly the pseudo-left, although actually increasingly taken up by the state apparatus itself, to justify the operations of US and NATO imperialism. The war was not unprovoked. It was provoked through decades of expansion of NATO to the east, the refusal to negotiate over the status of Ukraine, the 2014 Maidan coup backed by right-wing forces, the funneling of billions of dollars into the Ukrainian government and the puppet regime in Ukraine. It was provoked for definite aims, the expansion of imperialism, the effort to break up Russia, the direct access to Russian resources, the natural resources of Russia. So this was an imperialist operation. And those who claim that, that it's still the line, well, somehow the war in Ukraine is the good war. The war, it's backed by its funding has been supported by Ocasio-Cortez, by the DSA, Bernie Sanders, and that somehow this is the good war. And then you have the bad genocide, and we're critical of the genocide in Gaza, but absolutely support the war in Ukraine, as if these aren't two component parts of imperialism, of an imperialist war, and it's false. I would also add that there's growing opposition within Ukraine itself to the war. Zelensky operates on the basis of martial law, has canceled elections, is arresting opponents of the war. Tomorrow, I'm not sure when this will air, but Friday, October 25th, that is today, is 6 months since the arrest of Bogdan Syrotyuk, a Ukrainian Trotskyist, on trumped-up charges. He's an opponent of the war, of both the Ukrainian government and the Putin regime, and it's it's an outrageous attack on democratic rights, on opposition to the war. But it's a reflection of the fear of Ukraine and of the imperialist powers of opposition within Ukraine itself. So we reject the concept of Russian imperialism and the idea of the unprovoked war, and this is an imperialist operation. At the same time, we don't have any support for the Russian government, and don't think that the war can be opposed on that basis. The war has to be opposed through the development of a movement in the working class, uniting workers throughout Eastern Europe, Ukrainian with Russian workers, throughout Europe, the United States, and internationally, and on a class basis. As Trotsky said, follow not the map of war, but the map of the class struggle, that the basis for opposing war is not through or opposing imperialism is not through various bourgeois nationalist regimes in Russia, Brazil, or Syria, or anywhere else. It's through the development of a movement in the working class.
Hey Radicals, I hope that you're all enjoying this interview. As you know, this is the start of my spectacular 10th season. This is going to be a big one. We have lots of big returning guests, lots of new guests as well. So really want to make sure that it's great. Please do help support the show if at all possible. You can do that in a few different ways. You can like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me across all different social media networks. And also, if at all possible, please do consider financially supporting the show. You can do that at patreon.com/Primo Radical. When you become a patron, you can submit questions to all of my guests, so please do consider that. That's only $1 a month. Please also consider sending super chats and super thanks, and make sure again that you're just following me across all different social media networks. Thanks again, folks, for the last 9 years of support, and again, I'm looking forward to making this a great 10th season. Well, I also wanted to ask you about the economy, because I think that this is a major issue. Obviously, it affects everyone, but in the context of the election, voters constantly say that this is their top issue. Obviously, we've had other elections in the past where it's got framed as it's the economy, stupid. That's really the determining factor. And the economy in the United States and then throughout much of the West and the world has been pretty unstable for years now, especially since COVID. We had rampant inflation for years, and we had the interest rates that were raised, and that obviously created a significant problem for many households and small companies too. So I'd be curious what your thoughts are, on the economy overall, especially on the fact that we raised these interest rates that supposedly led to lower inflation. Now we're seeing relaxing of interest rates, and the economy is supposedly okay now. You just share your thoughts on that, and where you see the economy moving forward.
Well, I think that one of the factors driving imperialist operations and the recklessness of American imperialism is the economic crisis. And this is it's over a protracted period of time. That with each crisis, they have bailed out the banks with ever greater resources. 2001, 2008, the beginning of the Obama administration, the bailout, the TARP bailout, and then during the pandemic, when even more money was funneled into the markets. And that is, I think, one of the principal causes of inflation, as well as the massive spending on the military. But I think if, in terms of the economy as a whole, I mean, society is dominated by extraordinary levels of social inequality. The billionaires in the United States now have a collective wealth of $5.5 trillion. I think it's like an 87% increase over the past 4 years. You have gigantic corporations that dominate not only economic life in the United States, but economic life throughout the world. Firms like BlackRock, which has now assets of $11.5 trillion, nearly half the GDP of the entire United States. You have individuals like Elon Musk, the world's wealthiest man, $250 billion. I mean, this is the dominant element of social and economic life, is extreme levels of social inequality. And there's not anything that one can't really address the massive social crisis. And it's expressed in many different forms: the possible price of housing, the crisis in healthcare, public education, the attack on, there is now an escalating attack on jobs, where corporations are using new advances in technologies, including AI, as a means of intensifying the offensive against the working class. Boeing just announced 17,000 job cuts a couple of weeks ago as part of their effort to shut down and bludgeon the striking Boeing workers, which the workers have courageously defied. So this is, I think, the main issue, or the dominant element of economic life, is these massive levels of social inequality. And you can't, Socialist Equality Party in our program, we fight for and advance the idea that workers have basic rights, including the right to housing, the right to public education, the right to a livable income, to a job. But the idea that it's impossible actually to defend and fight for those rights outside of a frontal assault on the wealth and privileges of the corporate financial oligarchy, that is the basic issue.
Well, I do have two quick patron questions for you. So this first one is, we would love to know your position on Big Pharma as it relates to COVID.
Well, the Socialist Equality Party is absolutely opposed to those who diminish or deny the significance of the pandemic itself. And we advance and support all scientific measures to stop the spread of the virus. The pandemic has killed more than 1.4 million people in the United States, something on the order of 28 million people globally, untold millions who suffer from the prolonged impact of long COVID, which is still being studied and whose effects are not that well known. This is the product of the criminal indifference of the ruling class and both its parties to a massive healthcare crisis. There are, in fact, there were and are measures that can and must be taken to save lives and stop the spread of a virus like the coronavirus, COVID-19, but they were rejected. They were rejected, first of all, during the Trump administration, which promoted all sorts of anti-scientific conceptions, motivated fundamentally by the demand for workers to return to the job under conditions of the spreading pandemic, and the results were devastating. But in fact, this policy was continued under Biden, and now their policy is let it rip, endless infection from COVID, and this will continue. Absolute homicidal indifference to life, the real eugenicist conceptions. So we think that there are measures that must be taken to stop the spread of the virus, including mass access to vaccines, but all the other public health measures necessary to contain transmission. There are many technologies that, if employed properly, could make internal environments far safer, far UV technologies, air filtration systems, which have just been rejected because they cost money, and there's more money better be spent to finance wars and to bail out the rich. Now, in relationship to the pharmaceutical companies and the healthcare industry, certainly the subordination of the healthcare system to private profit has amplified enormously the impact of the pandemic. I mean, the healthcare system itself is under extreme crisis, overloaded hospitals, nurses who have just been devastated by the impact of the pandemic, and the subordination of healthcare as a basic human right necessary to the preservation of lives to private profit is outrageous. The insurance industry must be abolished. Healthcare should be placed under democratic control of the working class. Healthcare should be guaranteed to everyone free of charge. It should be financed by a massive increase in taxes on the wealthy. There has to be universal healthcare. And that is a critical instrument from ensuring, in fact, that everyone has the necessary care in response to not just the pandemic, but to everything. But we do reject the anti-scientific conceptions promoted first of all, by the Republican right, but actually adopted by as well the Democrats and promoted by the likes of RFK Jr. And adapted by Stein and West even, which claim that basically that the issue is the pandemic was manufactured, or that the vaccines themselves are the real culprit. No, we reject all that. The science is clear, but there has to be a scientific response to the pandemic, which is based upon public health and not the corporate private profit.
So sorry, just one clarifying question. Were you in favor of the vaccine mandates as they were proposed by the Biden administration?
We're in favor of vaccine mandates, yes, as basic public health measures. The idea that these are necessary measures to be implemented on a social level to save lives. Just the Biden administration. The question of mass vaccination as a instrument. Now, I think part of the issue is, of course, the promotion of all sorts of anti-scientific conceptions, and this was very deliberately done. Lies about the pandemic from the very beginning. Any real understanding of what was. Even the issues of the fact that the virus is airborne is still not widely understood. There's been a systematic campaign of miseducation, misinformation about the pandemic, about COVID-19, and the measures that have to be taken. But we oppose a sort of libertarian position on such issues. Public health must be, there must be, in response to COVID-19, there's a virus that has killed 28 million people all over the world, mass debilitation. There are measures which have to be taken to save lives, but the basis also of that has to be a program of education, so that the population understands what is necessary, why it's necessary, and in fact supports it. And you saw actually in China the zero COVID policy, which had broad support and was very, in fact, effective in the initial stages of the pandemic. Had an immense impact in preserving life and also allowing for normal life in China for much of the pandemic. Now, it ultimately failed. It failed above all due to the inability to address something like a pandemic within the framework of a nation state. But it also did demonstrate that there are measures, and we have all sorts of technologies that can be utilized to address something like this. But it does have to be developed as a conscious policy supported by the working class, by society as a whole. And the subordination of public health and everything else to private profit has really made that impossible. And again, that has been connected to a great deal of anti-scientific misinformation about the pandemic itself. I would encourage anyone watching this to go to the World Socialist Web Site. If you have questions about the pandemic and our attitude towards it, we have written extensively on it. There is really actually no source outside of with a record on the pandemic like the World Socialist Web Site. Interviews with leading scientists, epidemiologists, reports on long COVID, which is systematically ignored and covered up, treated as if it doesn't exist. It affects millions of people. The fact is that the pandemic itself is treated as essentially over, even when hundreds of people are dying every week. This is so I would encourage anyone who's watching this who has questions about it to go to the World Socialist website. We have our own on the Socialist Equality Party election campaign. We have our own policy positions on the pandemic, what has to be done, what can be done. But it is a critical experience. And it really has to be the real lessons of this have to be worked through.
And just one other patron question, and it might be somewhat related, actually. This is John in Chicago. He asks, why are you hostile towards Jimmy Dore? Sure, there are things you and him will never agree on, but there are a lot of issues where your goals and his overlap. Why be dramatic about the differences? Why not just focus on stopping the wars? That's what's important.
Well, this applies not just to Jimmy Dore, but the question is, there has to be a fight against war. it seems like that's the focus of the questioner's or the motivation behind the question. There has to be, but the issue is, well, how can that fight be developed? On what political basis? We seek to oppose and explain the politics of many different political tendencies, individuals which work to divert, which work to prevent a real understanding of the causes of war, of the genocide in Gaza, and how it can be stopped. In the case of Dore, there has been a pronounced evolution from a sort of populist left politics to a real far right politics. This was expressed in the Rage Against the War rally, the notion that the fight against war could be waged in a political alliance with the extreme right, outright fascist elements. Dore's own politics have moved ever more openly to covering up and indeed covering up the danger and indeed supporting the politics of the far right of Trump and those around him, which is very, very dangerous. The Socialist Equality Party is not among those who minimize the danger posed by the far right. And one of the initial forms that this took was the diminishing of the significance of the January 6th coup back in 2021, where elements, including Dore and others, presented this as something which was in fact not serious. The Trump movement is a very dangerous threat to the working class. When it talks about the enemy within, they mean opposition to war, to the policies of the corporate financial oligarchy. And they're working and preparing repression, the utilization of the military, the National Guard, sections of the state. And that will be directed against all opposition. I mean, Trump is sort of one of the bizarre elements of American politics, that Trump is getting a certain amount of support from those opposed to the genocide because of the clear and evident role of the Biden administration and Harris in this massacre. But Trump himself has called for the deportation of individuals involved in protests against the genocide. They're all in on the opposition, on the war against Iran. I mean, the idea that somehow Trump and the right, that they represent an anti-war, which is what Dore promotes, somehow an anti-war force, an anti-establishment force, is very dangerous and very wrong, and it has to be opposed. On the other hand, recognizing this fact doesn't at all involve support for the Democratic Party, which is a bloodthirsty party of Wall Street and war, and indeed whose reactionary policies have created the conditions in which Trump can exploit social anger. We have a very different perspective. So that the fight against war has to be developed as a class movement in opposition to both these parties, on the basis of an international perspective. And figures like Dore and they play a very harmful political role in promoting. Indeed, it actually, I mean, Dore has now become a very right-wing figure, frankly. I mean, we identified this early on when he invited a Boogaloo Boy person onto his show. This was during the last election cycle. Actually, I believe Jerry White was going to be interviewed. Actually, I'm sorry. It was somewhat after that. I apologize. I'm forgetting the timeline. But we identified this really early on, and I think it's developed in line with what we warned at the time. But the issue is the development of a movement in the working class. And we're going to undermine the influence of Trump in the working class and also undermine the Democratic Party by the fight to develop a movement in the working class on the basis of its independent program. And that means connecting the fight against the war to the fight of workers against the whole corporate financial oligarchy, and a ruthless exposure of the role of both parties. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I just I feel inclined just to because I recently had Jimmy back on the show, so just to kind of clarify, I think what he would say his position is. He said to me that he does not support Trump. He actually said that he's going to be writing in Dave Chappelle's name. But I've heard him make the argument before that he does reach out to folks on the right, and the reason that he does that is to try to unite the working class, actually, because he said the way that you would form a union is you wouldn't ask people their certain views and certain things. You would try to reach out to people on the left, people on the right, people in the center to build around class interests, which it also sounds like, that's kind of, what you would support too is, this broad working class unity. So I guess, do you think that that's disingenuous, that he doesn't actually want to do that, and then he's just spouting right-wing talking points effectively?
I think so, but you unite the working class on the basis of its class interests by exposing the political tendencies which are in fact working against its class interests. And in relationship to for example, the Rage Against the War rally, and they had another one. I don't know if Dore himself was involved in it, but they had another one a couple of weeks ago. That wasn't a question of
just so you know, he was, and he did actually during that rally speak up about not censoring people who were protesting in favor of Palestinians.
I have my Zionist friends who try to get me to go along with Israel. They say to me, they go, Jimmy, I know you support the LGBTQ. You know who doesn't? Hamas. Hamas doesn't support gay people. What do you say to that, Jimmy? I say, I guess we should slaughter their children. Anyway, people say that Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. You know why? Because we overthrew all the other fucking democracies so we could steal their oil.
Yeah, okay. But the issue is, bringing some more broadly question of Dore, but the issue, you fight against, or you fight to unite the working class on the basis of exposing the political tendencies that claim to represent it, but in fact don't. And if events like the Rage Against the War rally, bringing forward far-right figures or libertarian elements and saying, well, these are forces that are capable or want to oppose war, and let's unite with all of these different political tendencies in order to stop the war, while covering up the fact that these political tendencies don't in fact oppose war, that they're deeply hostile to the interests of the working class. We are fighting to develop a movement in the working class that unites the working class on the basis of a program that articulates the interests of the working class. And that requires that the workers come to an understanding of the role of different political tendencies, not by sort of uniting political tendencies on the basis of a nominally opposition to one or another, or nominally agreement on one or another position, for example, opposition to the war. In fact, they don't oppose war. The libertarians, they don't oppose war. But on the basis of, again, of a program that articulates the interests of the working class, and I think that's the basic issue.
Well, I know that we've gone a bit over, so I don't want to take up any more time. But I appreciate you being on the show today. I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to share in regards to your campaign or the message of the Socialist Equality Party.
No, well, thank you for having me on. I would encourage anyone listening to go to our website, socialism2024.org, to find out more about our campaign. I think this is a period where, big questions are being asked and have to be answered, that there are no easy solutions. I mean, we are running in the elections not because we think that that through this we are going, we're going to come to power and that's going to change everything. We're fighting in this election to develop a political movement in the working class among young people, students, and others who are gone through an experience, and to develop a deeper understanding. It requires a deeper understanding or a study of politics, a study of history, of the historical experiences of the class struggle, of the socialist movement, and an understanding of a different type of politics that must be fought for. So I would encourage this that those listening to really make a study of the history of our movement, the history of the Trotskyist movement, what we've written, to read the World Socialist Web Site, again, to support our election campaign and vote for us. But really, that's only an initial step. It has to be. We see the election as, I mean, whatever happens in the election, it's not going to resolve the deep crisis that workers everywhere confront. And so the issue is not just what we do in this election, but preparing that for what is to come after.
Yeah, that definitely, at the end of the day, I feel almost as though it is kind of eating up a lot of the attention of the working class, their attention and energy, and putting it into this one day where we cast the ballot, when we should probably fundamentally be thinking about more long-term strategies to liberate the working class.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. I really do appreciate your time today and going through all these issues, and hopefully I can have you back at some point in the future.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Primo. Great discussion. Thanks.